but because thou art compassionate, purify me by the compassion of thy mercies.
Hello, Antiochian men. This is Bryce Kirk here with another interview for our YouTube channel. I'm here today with Drew Garrison from St. John the Evangelist in Memphis, Tennessee. Drew is the youth director here at St. John. Drew, it's nice to have you on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So, Drew, why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, to a Southern Baptist family, a very devout Southern Baptist family. And I think it was probably my senior year in high school where I started branching out and trying to explore different traditions and different theological avenues and things like that. And pretty early on, I was exposed to Orthodoxy. And 5 years after that exposure, I moved down to Charleston, South Carolina, where I was received at Holy Ascension Orthodox Church in Holy Saturday, actually, of 2014.
Oh, wow.
I believe it was. Yeah, beautiful experience, man. If you've never been to that church, by the way, it is a gorgeous church. So I was received into the church, and since then, I've, had a passion for ministry and had a passion for being involved in ministry. And so I've done a little bit of college and young adult ministry down in Charleston. I got a job offer from Father Philip Rogers, who's the priest here, who I've known from camp. So my wife Sophia, and I have been involved at Camp St. Thecla for a number of years. And so we were able to develop a relationship with Father Phil through that. And, I called him on the phone one day just to get some counsel, and eventually that led to a job offer on the table. And so, thank God.
Absolutely.
So here we are. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. So this morning we actually spoke with His Grace, Bishop Nicholas, and he discussed the Antiochian men and other organizations as well. So where do you kind of see your role with young adults and with youth involved with the Antiochian men?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as the youth director here at the church, so my job is kind of threefold. So primarily it's youth ministry. And what youth ministry looks like in my mind, another branch off is twofold. It looks like establishing as grounded and as firm of a community for the teens as possible. So a small, I guess you can look at it as a small ecclesial community within the larger ecclesial community of the church. Specifically that teen group, a place where they can have, the opportunity to offer themselves just in loving relationships with one another and just enjoying each other's company, building those relationships, which I think is foundational for, I hate to put it like this, but in part foundational for retaining those young people, and
Absolutely.
and that being a foundation for them to continue to desire to be a part of the larger ecclesial community of the church. But also it's just great for them to have those relationships with one another, and I think that that's super important. And the second part of youth ministry, I think, is that's so vital is education. So I think, if our teenagers are going to, and us for that matter, but specifically, since we're talking about teens, if they're going to participate in the liturgy, which thank God they do, and we hope they continue to do so, but if they're going to do that and recite the creed, right, especially with everybody else every Sunday morning,
Right.
They need to know what it is that they're reciting.
Absolutely.
They need to know what it is that the church teaches and what we believe, because that's also foundational for them. I see all too often, I think there was a statistic that was given in the meeting, kind of rabbit trailing, but forgive me for that. But how my mind works sometimes. But there's a statistic that 6 of 10, 60% of young people, whenever they go off to college, leave the church completely, which is incredibly alarming. And I think a lot of that is based on a lack of community, a lack of belonging, a sense of belonging that's just not there for the young people, but also a lack of education. Right. So leaving the church because they think they know that the church teaches A, when it absolutely does not teach A.
Right. Yeah.
Right. In fact, it's very different. And so trying to educate teenagers on that, I think, is the second most important part of that. So back to my job description, I guess, is threefold. Teenagers primarily, college students. So I'm involved in the OCF chapter down at Ole Miss. So we go down once a week on Thursdays, and we help facilitate meetings and discussions. And we went axe throwing this past Thursday, just do exciting things together, just to again develop that sense of fellowship and togetherness, which is so important. And then the third is young adult ministry. So I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the Telos organization, the Telos Project, but our church is actually a Telos-sponsored parish. And all that means, very simply, is that there's an organization called Telos that has, through the Lilly Foundation, a certain amount of funding that has been able to sponsor certain parishes with, and those parishes receive grants that they can use to build young adult ministries with. So that's been a really interesting experience. I am on the board, the leadership team for that. So in regards to those three things and the involvement with Antiochian men, I think it's so vital to have something like Antiochian men, particularly because I think Michael said it really well that there are a lot of areas in the church that are underserved, and that's not to put blame on necessarily anybody in particular, obviously. But it's just a matter of fact that it's hard to really give everybody that ministry, that attention, and that spiritual feeding that they really need. But the men are definitely not exempt from that. The Antiochian, or the men in our diocese, Orthodox men are really one of these underserved groups, right? And it's just because there's not much there in the way of fellowship or education. Those two pillars that personally, I find so important. And so Antiochian Men is a great organization, and that, through that organization, you all and us collectively as the parishes are trying to address that, and trying to incorporate fellowship, incorporate education, these kinds of things, incorporate mentorship, and just general community, right? In all aspects, teens, college students, young adults, adult men, older men, all of that, And so I think Antiochian Men, the organization kind of being the support for those, and having its hand in all of those things is, I think that's great. I think that's definitely needed.
Certainly. Yeah. So what are some tips you might have for people with parishes in our diocese or in general for helping kind of jumpstart some young adult activities or youth or even some cross organizational activity, shall we say?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and to be honest, I think the first thing that we need to do is recognize that there's a huge need. Recognize that there is a massive need that needs our attention, right? So in our diocese, we have YAF, Young Adult Fellowship. Suanna Kine in Raleigh, North Carolina, is the president of that. And I sometimes help her. I think I'm technically the secretary. Regardless, we're in communication often about different retreats and things like that we have throughout the diocese, and planning those things, planning events for young adults. So I think initially realizing that there's a need, and then also recognizing where those opportunities are for these these groups can plug into, right? So for the young adults, there's YAF, right? For the college students, there's OCF. For the youth, there's Teen SOYO. For the men, I mean, Antiochian Men is really kind of going to be the champion of that. I think.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Right, the men's organization in particular. So just realizing that there are outlets for these different groups to have involvement and to have ministry, and getting in contact with the right people, seeking advice from other parishes who have active youth ministries, have active young adult ministries, reaching out and really just making that a priority. I think once that is a priority in one's mind, then I don't know, it's easy to think that we do what's necessary to address those things, right? And to give them the attention that they need. So,
Yeah, most definitely. Well, keep it a little shorter today. Thank you, Drew, very much for sharing.
Absolutely, man.
I hope it's edifying for anybody watching. And as a reminder, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon to get subscription notifications from us. Thanks for watching.
Prepare for me the ways of salvation, O Theotokos, for I have profaned my whole life with procrastination. But by thine intercessions, purify thou me from all above.